And that's why I think that yoga can be so beneficial for young people, such a vital practice right now for young people, because we are living in very trying times. I think being young has always been hard, but there are real valid external, like I said, like the external is still real.
Yeah.
And it's a really hard time. And yoga can be an integral part of building resiliency in the face of that.
Another episode of the SpeakReal Podcast, sharing one-on-one conversations. We believe that storytelling is the best way to empower youth and give them the platform to find their voices.
Presented by YouthSpeak. Youth experience, youth voice, youth empowered.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the YouthSpeak Podcast. I am Carson, and I'm your host for today. We want to thank TD for partnering with us on our IG Lives and podcast episodes. And without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our guest today, who is a certified yoga therapist. Her name is Julia. Hi. I was going to say your last name, and I was like, I'm going to fail. I'm going to fail.
I saw the pause there and I knew exactly what was happening. You know, I could always tell when somebody is trying to sell me something when they call, because they go, "Hi, may I speak to Julia C-IAYT?" And then I know that it's a marketing call. My last name is Erst. Julia Erst. Yes.
Oh, I love that. That's such a great last name.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So could you tell us a bit about yourself and your professional background?
Yes. So as you mentioned, I'm a certified yoga therapist. That's not the industry that I came from. I sort of cut my teeth in hospitality in restaurants. I was a babysitter. I washed dishes as my first restaurant gig, and then went to school at U of T for English and linguistics, but paid my way by working in restaurants and always loved it. Just loved hospitality, loved restaurants. So I'm actually a certified sommelier by training. And
what is that? I've never heard of that before.
You're a professional wine person, wine expert. Yeah. So that was my job for a time. And I loved it because I love taking care of people. I love being hospitable. I love, you're really good at your job when you're a server if you can see what somebody needs before they even realize they need it. It's a lot about anticipating needs. So I really liked that. I liked being social. And then, throughout working in restaurants, I'd always had a yoga practice for myself. I had a teacher and I went to see her once a week, or I would go to group classes. And I did that because I knew that I was a better person when I did my yoga practice. And eventually I did the thing that a lot of people do, which is you've been going to group classes for a while and you start to get hungry for more because you're like, okay, but what's actually going on here? Why do I feel awful when I don't practice and so much better when I do practice? What's going on here? So I sought out a teacher training. And it was mostly, at that point I had 2 young kids. I did my teacher training when my daughter was 6 months old. And at that point, I really was just looking for a way to explore my own personal practice. And by chance or fate, whatever you want to call it, I connected with Yoga Therapy Toronto and Ante and Felicia Pavlovic, who are my teachers. And within a couple of training sessions with them, I thought to myself, whatever these people are doing, I want to be on that train, because I just met these individuals who embodied so much of the practice and were really living what they teach and what they taught. So very quickly that became, okay, I'm going to do my yoga therapist training, because they're actually one of the only schools that train yoga therapists. So that was another 2 years, 1,000 hours of specialized training in yoga therapy. And here I am now. I teach a variety of classes around the city. I work with lots of different populations. So I work in some spaces that are, for cancer patients, and I'm teaching classes for them. I work in other spaces that are just like general classes. I work teaching postpartum with some people. But the heart of my work is actually one-on-one. So in the same way that, you know, you can seek out specialized help when you need it for all aspects of your life. Yoga therapy is just another modality for that. So I'll work with anybody who's curious about developing a yoga practice. That might be somebody who just, you know, was in an accident and banged up their shoulder and needs some work repairing that shoulder, or it might be somebody who, you know, is going through a cancer diagnosis and really trying to explore what that means for them, or somebody who has insomnia and doesn't sleep very well. Thinking about, yeah.
That's me. I love that my little duck.
Your fingers disappear.
My fingers didn't even disappear, but like whenever, you know, the Zoom thing
Oh,
where
you've got
like
webbed fingers.
I look webbed, but I also saw my little photo of like a general duck. I have a lot of weird images on my fridge, but we don't need to go there.
It's a shame you're blurred.
Yeah.
Or the back, you got to get rid of that background.
I hinted at them, so let me just show you my duck. I love ducks. It's very, oh my God.
You just you had to make it your face for it to work. That's very cute.
It's not like
I wish I had.
Yeah.
I don't have anything good to share around me, unfortunately. Nothing
Totally
worth
fine.
showing.
I'm just I feel like I'm reaching peak ADHD today, so but
you know,
please get that line out.
ADHD is something. I was working with a student this morning who has ADHD, and we were chanting, because when you're chanting, you can't really think about much else. It really holds your attention. And so we were working on chanting. So that's, yeah, really it runs the gambit, the kind of work I do. And, you know, the heart of why I loved restaurants and the heart of why I love being a yoga therapist are the same. I really cherish caring for people, and doing this work as a yoga therapist just allows me to sort of do that more directly.
Right. And you know, it's interesting because you've described this, how you describe different experiences. It kind of sounds both like physical therapy and like your typical therapy that we all know of. So what exactly is yoga therapy?
Yoga therapy really is, gosh, it's like trying to describe yoga. It's a whole world.
Yeah.
So it's hard to sort of distill it. You know, when we think about, or here, can I turn this question around on you?
Sure.
Is when you think about yoga, like, what do you think about? Not even yoga therapy, but just yoga. What do you think?
I kind of have a different response than what most people know, because I took a world religion class in high school and then a world cultures class after. And I did some anthropology studies. It was one of the things I was looking into. And so when I hear the term yoga, I'm like, my brain goes, any practice that is intentional.
Beautiful. Okay, well, congratulations, 10 out of 10. You've already got the answer. I'll just go. You can answer. Yes. So that is such a beautiful and honest answer. And when you compare that to you're walking down the street and you walk by a yoga studio, and that's not to say that that's not happening in those spaces, but the image that we often have of yoga is I go to the studio, I've got my sticky mat, I've got my Lululemon pants, or the like knockoffs.
I had the Lululemon mat as a kid.
Nice.
I did some yoga for a time and I was always the loudest kid in class.
With the breathing, you mean? Or
no, I just kept talking.
Oh, okay. Bless your heart. Right. The ADHD thing.
The bless my heart. Oh my God.
You'd be the one that I would call up to the front and be like, okay, you're going to demonstrate for everybody right now. You're going to stand on one foot. Yeah. We put you on the spot because you'll also rise to an occasion, I'm sure. Are
you therapizing me right now? Accurate.
So the yoga classes, you know, and we think, okay, I go in at 60 minutes and I do it once a week, and it's cardio, stretch, aerobics, fitness. And maybe at the end we do the thing where we all collapse and we lie down. And in that lying down, you know, maybe I'm bored for like 90% of it, but then something happens and I feel really good. So it's very much in our culture associated with a physical practice. That's kind of the roundabout way of getting to what I was trying to say, which is that, you go and you move your body and you feel better afterwards. And none of that is false. That's true.
Right.
But really, yoga, according to Patanjali, who's sort of the sage that codified the rules of yoga, or the teachings of yoga, and is the authority that in my lineage we sort of turn to for those definitions. Yoga is actually a tool for the mind. Yoga is how we bring the mind out of suffering. And the physical practice of yoga, asana, is, if you think of like rivers running into the ocean, right? We're all headed to the ocean. We're all trying to move out of suffering. And physical practice is one of the ways there, because the mind is this like slippery, intangible thing. It can be hard to work with. And so if you have a racing mind and you're like, I want to be more calm. Okay. I want to be more calm. I'm too stressed out. I can't sleep. Okay. So I'm just going to like sit down and tell myself to be more calm. Like that's quite cruel. Right.
Yeah.
And so what we do is we use the body and we move the body and we start to slow down the body with the breath. The breath is key. And over time, what we do is we actually start to quiet the mind. Or when I say quiet, it's that the mind begins to be able to operate more efficiently and operate without impurities or sort of wrong assumptions. And so yoga is both, sort of the end goal, which is this feeling of deep peace and connectedness. And it's also the means of getting to that place. It's also the tools that we use to get there. So yoga therapy is kind of taking all these little tools of yoga, physical practice, pranayama, concentration practices like meditation, chanting, visualization, but also ethical and moral considerations as well. Like, what kind of person do you want to be in the world? Taking all these rivers to help bring us to yoga. So as a yoga therapist, what I do is I work one-on-one with an individual and I look at you and I sort of we together identify, like, what are your goals? What are the areas that you're struggling in? And no two people are the same. So no two people should have the same practice. And even two people who have the same goal or the same concern
are going to practice it differently.
Exactly. And so it's artful. It really is. It's about trying to meet somebody where they're at and say, hey, what's something that you can do differently today than you did yesterday that will help move you towards a place where you ultimately find more peace and more ease.
Yeah. I really like that, especially the concept behind, not every person's going to need the same thing, because I fully believe that. We talk about coping tools, especially breathing and how that just naturally calms the body, but also like the fact that coping tools are going to work differently for every person, and that whatever works for you might change as well.
Well, that's the other big thing, is no two people are the same, and no same person is the same one day to the next, right? If you think of like we kind of visualize it like a set of stairs, yoga is the place where you step up. You do something differently today than you did yesterday. You reach a new achievement. And then there's this period of necessary consolidation where it just becomes a part of your life. That's no longer a big achievement. It's just now the new version of who you are. And then when you're ready to progress again, part of the role of being a teacher is to say, okay, now it's time for this. Now we're just going to pivot. So in the same way that a therapeutic relationship is an ongoing relationship, when we think about like psychotherapy or talk therapy, yoga therapy works that way as well. It's sort of like, here, take this and then come back to me, and we're going to reassess and see where you're at. So I see my teacher, because of course, even though I'm a therapist, I have a yoga therapist. I go see her every 3 months. And it's wonderful because she's of course going to see things that I wouldn't see in myself. she gives me a practice, and then I come back and I'm different. Things have changed. And sometimes that's everything's gone great and now I'm ready to go up. And sometimes it's like, whoa, life went really pear-shaped and I've kind of veered off course and I need your help getting back on, because that's just the reality of it too.
So true. That is such a mood. So what can a yoga therapy session look like then?
Yeah. So again, it's going to be different for different people. I had a yoga therapy session recently with somebody where we went and we did mindful walking outdoors because that's what that person needs. So that might be, the case for somebody. But usually what it looks like is, if I'm meeting you for the first time, we're going to get to know one another, intake and assessment. And some of that is through talking, but other things are involved, like taking the pulse, tongue analysis or assessment, looking at your physical...
tongue analysis? Please explain.
Yeah. So the tongue is one end of our digestive tract, and it can have a lot of information to tell us about what is happening inside the body. And it can also relate to what we call constitutions. So yoga is very closely related to Ayurveda. Ayurveda is sort of like the sister science of yoga.
Yeah.
And Ayurveda is the indigenous holistic healing and health and well-being modality of India.
Yeah.
And in that we talk about constitutions, which are sort of your makeup, how you were born is going to be different than how I was born. We might share similar qualities, but we're going to share them in different proportions.
Right.
And one of the ways that I assess sort of a little bit about who you are is by your tongue, because people's tongues will tell you about that. But that's like a whole other...
I'm like scared to show my tongue now. I'm like, oh my God.
I'm tempted to ask, but I won't put you on the spot. Maybe after we get off the call, you can like send me a picture and I'll tell you what I see.
Once we're done recording.
and the other thing that I'll say, like, please, I by no means would ever claim to be an Ayurvedic practitioner or an expert in that. For me,
disclaimer.
Yeah, like I am not one to act as an authority where I'm not, but I will use it to corroborate things that I'm observing or that you've shared with me. Right. And I'm seeing elsewhere. It becomes just like a puzzle piece,
it's
right?
the tool rather than the practice.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Whereas, a real Ayurvedic practitioner, I saw an Ayurvedic doctor on the weekend, and a colleague of mine who had also seen him was like, he knew I was pregnant by my pulse. So I hadn't told anybody yet, and he didn't mention anything at first, but he was looking at my pulse, and he was like, and made some observations, and I was like, oh, he could tell I was pregnant. He just didn't want to say.
Wait. It was that
that's the pulse.
He couldn't tell that your friend was pregnant, or that you were pregnant.
No, he could. No.
I'm getting confused.
Sorry. My colleague who went and saw him was pregnant. And he took her pulse. He took her pulse and could tell she was pregnant, even though she wasn't showing. So my point is, like, it actually is an incredible skill that other people have. I don't have, but what I'm doing is informed in part by some of the things that I've learned by studying Ayurveda. So coming back to what a session would look like, that's just a part of the intake, the observation. And then I would introduce you to your yoga practice. And so it's like, okay, you're coming to see me because you have, I don't know, you've just had hip replacement surgery. Maybe that's not the best, most relatable thing for me to share on a youth podcast. You're coming to see me because you really struggle around your period. You have really bad menstrual pain, right? Or something like that. This is what you're going to now do every day. This is your kind of like 10 to 15 minute little routine that's going to be a part of your day, because a key component of yoga therapy is that it's a daily practice. Our aches, our pains, life stresses, that's a sort of slow building problem that builds day after day. So what are we doing in yoga therapy to just like pull that back every day, right? To bring you back to balance. So I would introduce you to that. And then I send you home with like a little write-up of the practice. And then, you come see me again and we keep going from there. Like I talked about, right? The steps.
Okay. Interesting. All right. I just read the next question. I'm pretty sure you got the question sent to you, if I'm not mistaken, but did not know this until I read it. So, so you're comfortable talking about this, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So your experience with breast cancer, and how it cemented your therapeutic practice in yoga. Are you able to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It was, the it was the biggest challenge of my life and the greatest gift. And to say it sounds like a cliche, but those cliches exist for a reason. It is something that I'm incredibly proud of. And so I'm always happy and willing to talk about it. And I also work a lot with people who have either been recently diagnosed with cancer or are in the process of going through treatment. So I'm sort of always swimming in the waters of cancer. I'm never hesitant to talk about it. And so what I would just say, because, specifically in asking about, okay, how did your cancer experience affect you as a therapist and as a teacher? What I would say about that is that I really came to learn, there's the difference between what we know we should do and what we actually do.
Mood.
And like, it's very, what I'll say too, right off the bat, is that cancer is something that I think even people who haven't lived through it, you tell them cancer and they go, everybody understands that there's a real profound nature to the potential for suffering when you've gone through cancer. And I went through it all: diagnosis, surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. I'm in hormone therapy. Like, I'm still a cancer patient in many ways. What I've come to learn from working with people is that everybody's suffering in their own way. And I'll come to work with somebody who, maybe they are in perfect health, but they haven't slept properly in 4 years. And I see the level of effect that has on them. And it's no more or less valid than my experience as a cancer patient. So I have a really good perspective, I think, on recognizing that it's like, we're all struggling. This just happens to be the thing that I'm currently, facing. And so that difference between what we know we should do and what we actually do is a very universal one as well. But for me, at least, what happened was I was lucky. It was very auspicious timing that I was going through this therapy training and I was learning all these things. And then I got diagnosed and it was like, oh, here's my opportunity to actually really put this into practice. And so it just gave me a chance to really embody these teachings. I received my diagnosis. I was actually in training when it happened.
Oh, wow.
I had gone for the biopsy and the test and everything and was expecting this follow-up call. And I stepped out to get the call from my doctor, fully kind of thinking she was going to be like, whoo, you're all clear. And instead it was like, you're not. And, I had my moment and I called my husband and we walked around and cried for a couple hours. And then I looked at him and I was like, I want to go back to class. And he was like, are you sure? Like, you don't have to do this. And I was like, no, like, I want to. And I went back, and that afternoon we were doing therapeutic chanting. And so I just got to like sit there and like cry silently to myself while this room full of people sang healing chants. And I just knew that it was going to be different. I just knew that it was like, this is my chance to really be the kind of person that I want to be. And I do not have control over, because at that point I didn't know anything about my, survival expectations or anything like that. And so I was like, I don't know that is out of my control. What can I control? And so
Right.
what cancer really taught me too is like control what you can. And I knew that at any moment I could connect to my breathing. And this is a key thing with yoga as well, is we talk about the relationship to the breath and how the breath pulls us into presence. Because the mind wants to suffer, because you want to like freak out about what might happen in the future or like ruminate about what happened in the past, but the breath lives and dies now. And so there would be times in the early days where I was like, I'm gonna die, like this is really scary, and I would just stop, 10 deep breaths, and it would have passed, and
Yeah.
what previously might have been a whew, like a real deep dive, was just, you were able to kind of go like, whoop, like kind of stumble, like roll your ankle, as opposed to like breaking your leg.
Yeah, I roll my ankle a lot, ironically, but I've never broken a bone. At least I don't think I have.
Right. So it's just like a little pivot.
Yeah.
When I was going through treatment, the other thing too that I would say it really cemented was this idea that it's like your practice has to be every single day. And it doesn't have to look the same every single day, but at least once a day. And so I have it. I even have it here. You see my candle.
Your candle.
My candle. I light a candle. And there were days where I was very, very sick. And all I could do was light a candle and take a breath and blow it out and go back to bed and be very, very sick. But I did. And so, yeah, the power of daily practice and committing to the things that you can control and trying to let go of the things you can't. I would say those were sort of like the two biggest lessons for me.
And we do talk about in our presentations a lot how much having a routine can be very beneficial to your mental health. So I feel like that really like cements that further. Also the story about finding out and then going to a chanting thing. I don't know why that just felt like weirdly serendipitous. Like I felt like that was like you knew you needed that.
That's
like
right.
I think deep down you kind of knew you needed that. So that was really interesting. On a less intense topic, on your website, you mentioned the responsibility to address privilege and unconscious bias, as well as yoga's ancient indigenous roots. Can you speak on that?
At first I was like, do they recognize that this is not a less intense topic? But by the time you got to the end of the question, I think you were there.
I've been doing that lately. People online do this thing where they like put a slash and then say sarcasm, or a slash and they're like serious. And I've been doing that lately because I realize my sarcasm is not clear to people. And it's not even like them or anything they're doing. It's how I present it. I'm just bad at sarcasm.
Or you're just so good that you can't read it.
I guess so.
Yes. So I do have this statement on my website. I think it's really important. And it's a question that I revisit very frequently, right? Which is the need to acknowledge that okay. So yoga, like the thing that makes yoga so powerful is that fundamentally it's accessible to all people. If you're alive, you are breathing. If you can breathe, you can do yoga, right? So when you offer people who are suffering deeply these sort of practical and applicable tools, that it's like, okay, I get that you can't practice for 45 minutes every day, but for 2 minutes, you're going to breathe in for 4, hold your breath for 4, breathe out for 4, and hold your breath for 4. And you watch what 2 minutes of just conscientious, I light my candle practice every day. When you see what that does for people, it's so powerful. And it really helps people realize like, wow, I actually have a lot of ability to enact positive change in my life. I can do something different today than I did yesterday. Realizing that people aren't so helpless, like to realize that you aren't so helpless is so empowering. And it's such a gift to give to people. And we are all individuals who are part of larger systems that do have influence over us, right? So something that we talk about is the social determinants of health, right? That these are the sort of like non-medical factors that influence health outcomes.
Yeah.
And so these are the conditions in which you're born, you grow up, the conditions in which you live, and the conditions in which you age, these wider sets of forces that are like systems, the systems that shape the conditions of an individual's daily life. And these are things like, economic systems, social norms, the political system where you live, right? These social determinants of health have very real and important influences on health outcomes, right?
Yeah.
So they're unfair and they are avoidable. And yet we know that across all countries, and not even countries, but across like within cities and between one household and another, we know that the lower your socioeconomic position, right? Essentially, the less access you have to resources, whatever those resources might be, but financial is a huge one.
Yeah.
The lower that is, the worse your health outcomes are, right? But when yoga presents itself only as, hey, it's all up to you as the individual to decide whether you'll be in perfect health or not, which might theoretically be true. I do believe in the promise of yoga to heal. I do believe in that wholeheartedly. But when we conflate that or we ignore the social aspect of it, what we do is we end up saying, if you're sick, that's your fault. You didn't work hard enough. If you're too depressed to get out of bed and practice, that's because you're a bad person, right? And that's not only like deeply harmful and hurtful and unfair, it's simply not true.
It's really
because
not
we
true.
know when you raise socioeconomic, when you do away with inequities, everybody's health improves, right? So the whole like pull yourself up by the bootstraps, if you wanted it bad enough, you would get it, it's just erroneous. So for me, I am constantly sort of trying to hold both these things, which is you can change your life so drastically with the power of yoga. And it might not be as easy for you to make those very simple changes for things that are not your fault. And if you're sick, it's not your fault necessarily, right? Listen, if I know that I suffer from insomnia and I stay up late watching like videos on my phone, and then I'm like, why can't I sleep? Yes, there's an individual responsibility there. Absolutely. But we can't pretend that, the playing ground is even. And so part of my work as a therapist, I'm white, I'm cisgendered, I'm able-bodied. I was raised in a stable household. I'm educated. I've come to realize that the stories I might have told myself previously, or the feelings I might have had about why I am where I am in terms of the things I've achieved, the life I lead that is beautiful and I love, that those aren't necessarily the full truth of the matter. And so as a yoga therapist, I have work to do in just unpacking that. And there's an added layer as well, because of course, yoga is an ancient and indigenous practice from India that was violently suppressed by Britain when it was a colony. And so what does that mean? Who are the voices? Who are the people who aren't in yoga spaces, right? And so one of the questions that comes up later is like, where can people find you? And I'm like, I'm not on social media, in part for my own mental health, but also there's also a part of me that's just like, my voice isn't necessarily the one that needs to be amplified right now. And so, I work really hard to stay authentic to the lineage as I've been taught, to not cherry pick and go, ooh, I liked this, I liked this, I like that. I'm going to mix that all together, right? What I teach has come down in tradition, from an Indian practitioner. And I try to honor that every single day in my practice and never present it like it's my own. I stand on the shoulders of my teachers and their teachers before them. And that's something that I honor.
Yeah.
And I do that in my own ways, in my own personal practice. But I also try to do that like when I'm talking about yoga, making it very clear that I'm not the authority, that these things come through me, but they're not from me.
I really appreciate that, but continue.
Well, just that the final piece of that too is, white descendant of settlers. I also have work to do in addressing reconciliation here. It's not just about yoga as an indigenous practice in India. It's also whose lands am I on here, right? Haudenosaunee, Mississaugas of the Credit, the Wendat. That work, actively engaging in conversations around reconciliation here in Canada and uplifting voices here in Canada as well, is also an important part of my practice. But, a tenet that I hold and have been told, I didn't make this up either, is that, my healing, my personal practice is worthless if it does not serve to benefit others. That my healing and my peace needs to be for the benefit and the healing and the peace of all beings. And the beautiful thing about the practice of yoga is that it's one of expansion and one that allows us to hold multiple truths. So these are sticky, tricky things to navigate. And the yoga practice itself is actually the place to explore that. And that's why I think that yoga can be so beneficial for young people, such a vital practice right now for young people, because we are living in very trying times. I think being young has always been hard, but there are real valid external, like I said, like the external is still real. And it's a really hard time, and yoga can be an integral part of building resiliency in the face of that.
Yeah, for sure. And I really like how you broke all of that down, especially considering like there's a lot of layers to this, especially with yoga. I'm always very mindful of that with yoga practice or just anything related to mindfulness. I'm always very mindful of like who's delivering the message and why, because not only just with the institutions and the colonization of everything, but when you also relate to like just wellness in general, we tend to negate in society how much race plays a role in that, how much it affects economics as well, and depending on where you are in the world, and how in a lot of situations, your gender versus your race and all these things, people are not going to acknowledge certain things, certain health conditions that might affect one community or race more than the other, and whether or not those people are believed. And like I know a lot of people did not believe certain things about me, and I had to like basically fight to get people to like recognize, hey, there's a problem here. And I'm white. So that really goes to show you that, there's a lot at play, and it can be very difficult to navigate that. But you seem to have a very good grasp of that. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. Too often, I think people seek out comfort as opposed to actual healing, and mistake the feeling of I feel good when I go to this yoga class for this yoga class is actually challenging me to become a better version of myself, right?
Hold on, I'm just having a aha moment, like, Oprah. Oh no. It's fine. I'm fine. We're fine.
Just take a deep breath.
This is what I mean when I say that my life is both a joke and constant therapy. But with that said, how does yoga therapy relate to mental wellness? Do they
Well,
intersect much?
like you tell me based off of what just happened there.
I think it does. I think when we are discussing a lot of different things, a lot of different issues, your mental health can really shift. And a lot of it, throughout the years, I've learned that a lot of things that people put pressure on are due to systems, are due to culture, are due to how you were raised. And then also just straight up human biology. There's like human biology to show like, oh, the reason why we're so harsh on ourselves is because of that innate survival instinct to want to like improve so that we survive. And when I figured that out, I was like, oh, so this is just my brain doing its brain thing. Okay. The negative self-talk, all of that. It's really important to navigate that, at least for me, in a way where I'm mindful that this is just what my brain does, but this is also what brains do. It's a brain. It's an organ. It's like, why are we punishing ourselves through our brains for doing its job when we don't do that with our liver or heart or anything like that?
I like that, because in yoga too, a lot of the effort is to put the mind back in its place. So we live very much in our heads, not only in this current time that we're in, but also in our culture, right? Like we're very much driven by practical knowledge base. What can we know? What can we prove? What can we see and observe and say this is real and pin it down? And not to downplay how important that sort of scientific methodology has been. Yeah, absolutely. But the mind is not the only part of ourselves. And a lot of yoga is about exploring that. And what I love about it is you actually kind of get to go, okay, mind, you can just like hang out over there. I'm going to work over here right now. And whereas other tools for mental health often keep us in the mind, yoga moves us out of the mind into the body, right? So sometimes we can sort of get stuck in a loop of talking about our problems. Talking is good, being seen is good, being witnessed is good. Having a voice to, I say something and somebody mirrors it back to me and I hear it and I'm like, oh, do I actually believe that? All that is very, very helpful. And I think we need to go further. And what yoga does is say, listen, we're not going to heal the mind through the mind. We're not going to tame the mind through the mind. We're going to tame the mind through the body. And so the sort of, scientific answer is nervous system regulation, right? When we talk about how does yoga relate to mental wellness, it's like the autonomic nervous system controls our kind of like unconscious functions like breathing and like our heart rate. And when we're in our parasympathetic nervous system response, that's when we're like, everything's chill, I can rest, I can heal, I can digest, I'm safe. And when we're in our sympathetic nervous response, that's when we're like, I feel threatened, I'm not safe, I need to run, I need to hide, I need to fight, I need to freeze, I need to flee, all those things, right?
Fawn, freeze, and what's
pain, flight, fight,
freeze, fawn.
Is there 5?
There is a 5th.
Gosh, they keep adding F's. I didn't even know there was a 5th.
They keep adding F's into the chat.
And what yoga says
I hope someone comments on that. Please, someone comment below about if you know the reference. Comment below.
So what happens is a lot of us are actually walking around most days feeling like we are under attack when we're not, right? And I'm not unique in saying that. That's sort of broadly accepted right now. And what yoga does is by connecting the breath with movement, deep diaphragmatic breathing, where we're fully engaging the breath. And that's something that in a yoga therapy session I would teach and we go through it. Synchronizing that with movement brings the mind into presence. So I'm now focused, I'm more fully aware. And so these long diaphragmatic breathings still the mind because I'm more conscious about what it is that I'm actually doing, but it also tones the vagus nerve. And when we do that, we shift we like downshift from sympathetic fight, flight, FFF response into like, ooh, I'm actually safe. And we didn't have to talk our way there. It just happened to us because we were going through the practice. And so when I'm working therapeutically with people, that really is a key component, is like, yes, we're going to talk, but we're actually mostly just going to move and breathe, and positive visualizations. You know, we kind of have this principle. It's like the 2 lines principle. So this is you, the individual, and this is the stressor. And yoga sort of sees that it's like when we're struggling, it's because you just feel smaller than the thing that's stressing you out. And so rather than focusing on the stressor and continuing to amplify it by talking about it, what do we need to do to build you up? So what are the empowerment practices that we can do for you? And again, I hope that after everything else I've said about how valid a lot of those stressors are, this is a very simplistic sort of way of describing it, but it is a valid one too. And so that's definitely something that, you know, is a principle for how we work, is like, how can we build you up? Because life is always going to be full of stressors, big and small. And the only consistent thing there is going to be you. And so again, going back to my own experience with cancer was the stressor and was out of my control. What could I control? And so in doing that, I built up my own feeling of strength, of what we call virya, and like resiliency, to help me navigate that stressor with a little bit more ease.
Yeah, that everything you said just made so much sense. I'm like, you're very good at like breaking things down and explaining and you know, just highlighting like the care one can give to themselves through this. Though knowing, working as like a facilitator and knowing how it can be with taking care of ourselves, how do you maintain your own self-care routine while managing your yoga practice?
I see it as a responsibility to my students to be honest and real and authentic in my own practice.
Right.
Because if I show up and I'm totally dysregulated, again, a lot of what we've been talking about is this idea of like nervous system regulation. If I'm in a tailspin, I'm not in a place to actually hold space for somebody else to not be okay. So, you know, sometimes, unfortunately, doing it for ourselves is not enough of a reason. It's like we have to do it for other people. So there's my students I do it for. I also have 2 young children. And there's a big difference in the kind of parent I am when I'm doing my practice every day than when I'm not. Right. And, you know, for teachers working with students too, or parents of kids, it's really vital that you have your own practice, that you do your own work so that you can show up. Again, it goes back to that idea of my practice has to be for the benefit of me and others. Yeah. And so that's why it's just a non-negotiable. And so it's not always like, it's not always long. Sometimes I just like go into the room, close the door, do 3 sun salutations, and I call that a day. I do my evening practice where I like get the kinks out of my body. I do that while my kids are falling asleep. I like lie on the floor in their room because that's how I'm going to get it done. I could say ideally it would be in my like calm yoga space with incense burning and candles lit and ethereal music playing, but then it just wouldn't happen.
Your own little space to do like yoga in a house with kids? What? You don't have that in this economy?
No, shocking. I practice next to their bunk beds. It is actually the only space in our whole home where it makes any sense to do any yoga. And so, but that's the beautiful thing about it is yoga is not somehow this thing that has to happen in isolation and be perfect, which again, I think is part of our misconception of it, because we go to yoga classes and the music is right and the sounds are right and the smells are right and everything's nice.
Turn down the lighting and they're like, namaste.
No, yoga is your everyday life, you know, like my teacher's teacher, Deska, he always said that the best indication of the quality of your yoga practice is the quality of your relationships. And so it's like, if your yoga practice is not making your relationships better, then it's not serving you. And so for me, learning how to just fit yoga into my day, not like, don't come in here, kids, I'm doing my yoga practice so I can relax and be a good person. You know, I was doing my practice today and my daughter walks in and I'm like, oh, you need help putting your socks on? And it's like, yeah. So I put her socks on and then I go back to my practice. Would it be more ideal for me to not be interrupted? Absolutely. But
she needs her socks on. It's important.
She needs her socks on. And I don't want to be the mom that's like yelling at her because she interrupted me because I'm doing my yoga. Then she's never going to practice yoga. It's going to be like a trauma thing for her.
Yeah.
So yes, yoga is a part of your everyday life. You just you find a way to do it. And so that's how I maintain that for myself.
I'm curious about this because I don't know how much you know about my story that we talk about online, but I'm a recovering addict and I've had a similar thing of like, okay, well, part of my recovery is because I talk about it, there is this responsibility added on. So I want to ask you, do you sense a pressure with it sometimes? The pressure to maintain something like that? Does it feel like that ever?
Only if I'm more worried about performance and the performance of the role of yoga therapist.
Yeah.
Right?
That's exactly what I was thinking for myself. It's like if I focus too hard on like the experience or like what people are going to perceive me as when they hear my story or things like that, it's always like, oh, so much more intense. But then when I'm just like, I'm just going to talk about my life because why not? It's very much more chill. Yeah, when I focus it as like it's my job to do this, it's a lot more intense.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And authenticity and candor, it's when you share with people in a way that is appropriate and useful, being vulnerable is actually a very beautiful thing. And it's a gift to give others. When you're sharing without boundaries or you're sharing for your own sense of self and ego, like it's not so useful. But to be vulnerable, to teach from a place because you've lived it and are still going through it and still working through it, I think actually people pick up on that. And it's actually more powerful for somebody to say, this is something I struggle with and I'm working on it and this is how I see that it benefits me, as opposed to, oh no, I'm beyond those problems and I do this practice. For me, at least, when I get a glimpse into somebody having vulnerability and also seeing the benefit of the kind of person that they are because of the practices that they do, that goes a long way for me.
Yeah, for sure. So back to the actual questions. Sorry for that tangent. We like discussing topics like kindness, giving back to the community. So I guess it's been listed here that you've done some volunteer work. So I would love to hear about that.
Yeah, I was thinking about this question. It's really because my relationship to volunteer work is sort of changing. When I first started teaching, a way that you get experience is just by volunteering your services.
Right.
And I'm really grateful for that because that's how you flex that muscle. That's how you get better. So I've done some really rewarding volunteer work with the Stop Community Food Center in Toronto. They have a healthy beginnings program. It's like a perinatal support program. Volunteer teaching there. And then also with Gilda's Club, which is a cancer support network. So volunteer teaching. But then I've been thinking about more and more. It's like, I really love the spaces that I go and volunteer with where like I'm not in that space as a yoga therapist, as a teacher doing that work. I'm there because it's like I live in the community. I've been like the bike marshal at a bunch of local community actions in the last 6 months.
Oh, wow.
So, what are the things you can volunteer in where it's like somebody's got to make the coffee at this community gathering, and those are the sort of volunteer opportunities that I'm more and more excited about because again, that takes it from that individualistic I'm a yoga therapist, so I'm going to come in and teach yoga in these spaces, to more of the like, I'm a yoga therapist. What am I seeing in my community that is the real barrier for people to access health and wellness? And how can I mobilize myself to be more useful to them? Because often, if you're going to go into a place with marginalized communities, it's sort of somewhat galling to be like, okay, come sit and do your yoga practice with me. It's like, you're worried about how you're going to make rent, right?
That is so for real. I feel like I have met at least like 12 people like that. Oh my God.
You can't,
Oh my God.
like, the rise in the cost of living is devastating you, and you can't afford your grocery bills anymore. And that's why you're relying on a food bank,
The
or,
downward dog.
It's strange, right?
It's so strange.
Or
Oh
it's
my
not
God.
strange. I mean, again, it's the yes and it's both. Because the other thing is that I'll say is like, these people do really enjoy the classes when I give them to them. So, because that also somehow implies that it's like people who are marginalized don't benefit from yoga. They do. They do benefit from a yoga practice. But for me personally, I'm really getting interested in is like, what can I do to actually advocate so that we aren't dealing with so much food inequity, and this nutrition deficit in people who are reliant on food banks. And that is more political. That's more getting involved at the local level to address inequities that I'm seeing in my community. And in terms of volunteer, doing that in community with other people has been kind of the most rewarding work that I've done as a volunteer.
Yeah. And I think that's really cool that you've been navigating that relationship with it, because my experience with volunteering was not, how do I word this? My experiencing with volunteering was through force. Like, I was forced to volunteer. So I have a complicated relationship with it. I see its benefits. I see its incredible, like, just the incredible nature of humankind to like just help. That's very tainted for me. So I guess navigating that, it's just interesting to see how you're breaking it down, because I don't know, my brain kind of just immediately goes into shutdown mode with that. But I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Oh, wait, that's a good point. So I just like how you've been, I don't know what the right word here is, but how you've been breaking that down for yourself.
Thank you. Yeah. How can I be more engaged? And what are the actual values that I'm developing through my own yoga practice that I can put into practice and get out into the world and do that? And for me, what feels more truthful right now is less about going and teaching a free yoga class. And it's more like putting my privilege on the line and using the sort of privilege that I have to advocate for better and more fair systems in my community.
Yeah, that's real. That is real. Well, you already asked this question as a throwaway line, but I'm gonna ask it anyway, because you do have a website. Where can the audiences connect with you? Plug yourself.
I have a website. That is like the best way to get a hold of me, or just over email. I'm always happy to have conversations. So my website is Julia Ayrst. That's JuliaAYerst.com. And then my email address is juliaerstyoga@gmail.com. I have an Instagram handle, but I'm not really on it. It's called Find Your Yoga Therapy. And that's nice. If someone wanted to add me on Instagram in the event that maybe one day I start posting.
You just share a post and everyone's like, oh.
Or nobody does because nobody's following me because I never post.
Depends on how the algorithm's going, honestly, like truly, the algorithm is really the defining factor of that.
What I'll say too is if you go to my website, sign up for my newsletter, because I send monthly newsletters that have a bit more depth to them, and also are the best way to sort of keep in touch with where I'm teaching. Because as much as I work one-on-one, I also teach a couple group classes in the city. So that's another way to practice.
Awesome. We will have Julia's info in the description of this video. So if you guys want to learn more about yogic practice or hear more from Julia about different topics, I highly recommend it. I feel like I'm going to be reflecting on this conversation for a minute. So I really appreciate that. I always love when that happens with these episodes. That's why I like hosting these so much. Thank you again to TD for partnering with us on our Instagram lives and podcast episodes. We really appreciate it. If you like this content, make sure to like, subscribe, all of that stuff, and follow YouthSpeak everywhere. You know where we are, YouthSpeak Can on most places. And with that, have a good rest of your day.
If you want to hear more stories, don't forget to subscribe, comment, and like. To support more youth by youth-led projects, visit us at youthspeak.ca, where you can donate and spread youth mental health awareness.
YouthSpeak Charity. Speak, inspire, change.